Buried at the edge of the wood and shrouded in shadow from morning till night, sat a small house which was home to a poor mother and her 2 young sons. The woman had an unconscious habit of playing favorites with her children, though she loved them both. Still, as the autumn wind grew colder, she sent the youngest into the forest for firewood each day. The young boy's excursions soon required more and more daylight for each trip he took, until one particularly unfortunate day, the boy realized the sun was about to disappear from the sky and he had only a few sticks to bring home. Though he feared coming back with so little, the boy knew he was not safe in the wood after dark. He looked around the clearing he'd come to stop in, and suddenly he felt a strange pang of fear in his heart. He was being watched. The boy let instinct take over and took off for home, with the last scraps of the light escaping through the sunless boughs of tall pine trees overhead. He arrived at the front step of his house, heaving for breath, hurting, but just grateful to have made it all the way home safely. Though he couldn't say why, he felt threatened as he ran home, as though maybe he hadn't been alone in that clearing after all. His mother, however, was more concerned about the fruits of his labor, or lack thereof. The boy tried to come to his own defense, but his mother, vexed and now worried for tomorrow, ordered him inside quietly, and insisted that he should leave earlier and stay out later from now on, if necessary. The youngest son apologized and took himself to bed early after the meager supper he and his family had to share. He heard his older brother ask in the next room if he might not also help gather firewood, but their mother, fretting being left alone, wouldn't hear of it. She needed him around the house. Hearing all this from his bed, the youngest son blamed himself for not staying to get more firewood, but thankfully the run home had brought a powerful drowsiness over the boy, and quite soon he was fast asleep. He dreamed about a beautiful place deep in the wood, though that is all he could ever remember. For the next few days, the youngest son crept further and further into the forest, and each time he felt at some point as though he were being watched. He became unsettled enough to tell his family, but his mother refused to hear of it. Winter drew near, and soon it would be too late, and besides, there were no wolves this far south. On a terribly unfortunate day, when everything seemed picked clean, the boy was surprised to run into another child his own age. Strangely, the child seemed nearly identical to himself, but this young man was much stronger than he, and had gathered an impressive number of branches and pieces of firewood. It was no wonder the youngest son had been having so much trouble. It would seem he had competition this far into the forest. When he warily greeted the newcomer, the peculiar little boy did not speak, but upon noticing the few sticks in the youngest son's hands, seemed to gesture an offering with the armful of wood he himself carried. "You want me to have it?" the young boy asked. The other boy nodded, smiling slowly. There was something odd about it, to be sure, but the youngest son was too grateful and too relieved to think on it. The 2 boys made their way through the twilight, back to the little house at the edge of the wood. As the light burning in the window emerged into view, the strange boy stopped short and dropped the wood he had been so effortlessly carrying. When the youngest son turned to question him, he realized that his companion had vanished into thin air. The boy ran inside to tell his mother of all that had happened, but she had become so frustrated with the way she thought his trips into the forest were allowing his mind to play tricks on him, she was too stressed and far too weary to hear it. The youngest son fell asleep and dreamed, though about what no one can be certain. The next few days were fruitful, and the young boy came to enjoy his time in the forest with the strange mute child, no matter how cold the woods became. The next evening, as the sun set over the wood, the youngest son returned home, alone this time, but with an armful of firewood and a special surprise, a single perfect rose that had yet to blossom. Once again he told his mother stories about the boy in the woods, his imaginary friend, she had decided, utter nonsense, and that today the boy had told him something very exciting. "I'm going on a journey," the boy exclaimed. "The boy in the woods who looks like me said so." "Really, dear?" his mother replied, not listening. "I thought your friend didn't speak? Can't keep up with your stories, He handed his mother the rosebud, which she only took after he waved it in front of her face for several moments. "I told you, he's been learning to talk when we're gathering wood, and yesterday he said I'm going on a journey and that I'll return when this rose blooms." His mother sighed, finally accepting the offered flower. "Is that so, dear?" she said, placing the rosebud into water and returning to her mending without paying such wild stories any mind. "Then it had better bloom by tomorrow night, 'cause we need the firewood now," she muttered. The next morning at dawn, the poor mother awoke to find her youngest son already out of bed, and assumed he'd gotten an early start to his gathering. Perhaps he'd listened after all, she thought. But when her youngest didn't return late into the evening, the mother became distraught and, sending her eldest out into the night to look for his brother, paced about the house, irritated that her child would be so irresponsible. Despite her frustrations, she could not shake the feeling of unease that crept into her heart that night and made its bed there. Only by the light of the early morning did her eldest finally return with his brother, but he did not come with good news. The youngest son's lifeless body lay in his arms, and the mother wept openly in the snow for him, realizing all her mistakes too late. That night, as the sun went down and the mother prepared her son for burial, a quiet fell over the little house. The woman's eyes fell upon the rosebud vase sitting on the table next to her child's body. Sometime in the evening, it had bloomed. As she looked upon it, a sudden tapping at the door startled her. The mother hurried to open it, only to remember that her eldest was still inside. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice quaking. There could be no mistake. The voice she heard back through the door belonged to her youngest son. "Please let me in, Mother," it said. "I've returned from my journey, and I'm cold."